Hey guys, welcome back to Heal, Survive, and Thrive. I'm super excited because I have Shannon Jackson here from A Healthy Push. I want you guys to go find her on Instagram right now. We're going to talk about everything anxiety related. And I love this topic because someone who has suffered with anxiety has had panic attacks. And if you've ever had one, it is probably the worst feeling in the world. So we're going to talk about all of that. And we're going to give you some tips, right? Some stuff that has worked for us to hopefully help you guys if you are suffering. So Shannon, thanks so much for joining.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. And this is one of my absolute favorite topics to talk about. So
well, and I love that solely when I saw your stuff, I was like, first of all, I just love your videos. I love your little skits of you, on one side of the driver's seat, on the other side of the driver's seat, basically having this conversation, your mind essentially having this conversation with yourself. And it's so relatable and so true because that's really what's going on in the head when this stuff is going down.
Yeah. And people don't see that, right? That is like something that I identified, these are things that actually happen. These are things that I went through, thoughts that I had, like really tough stuff that I had to work through. And nobody sees or hears what's happening when you're having these really highly anxious moments or panic attacks. So I wanted to be able to show this is what it looks like. And here's how you can start to respond in a healthy way. So
cool.
And
I think it's important for people that are like super new to this stuff where they're just realizing that, for me growing up, I didn't know it was anxiety. Like I didn't know that. My mom wasn't able to label that for me. She always said, you're nervous Nelly. You're nervous Nelly, or I would get belly aches, as a child, and I'd be like, Mom, I'm sick. Like I can't go to school. I have a belly ache. And I didn't know what it was. So, I think just even anyone nowadays, like a 16-year-old watching your video, to me, that would have been such an eye opener to be like, wait a minute, I have that conversation in my head and it looks like that. Let's talk about, and I really wanted to dive into this. Let's talk about agoraphobia, like the fear of leaving or being, I guess, out of your comfort zone. So let me hear your thoughts on that. I'm just going to throw it at you.
Yeah, no problem. So agoraphobia is one of those things that like has so many misconceptions to it. Like people's automatic thoughts typically are you struggle with agoraphobia and you don't leave your house. And it's like not the case. Some people do struggle with being housebound, but with agoraphobia, it's typically the immense fear of experiencing panic and fear outside of, just like you said, your comfort zone, your safe zone, wherever you've designated that to be. So oftentimes for many people, it is their home, but for many others, it can be your car. It can be a friend's house. It can be a store because there are a lot of people around. It can be anywhere where you feel like, okay, I am not in danger. I feel more comfortable, or I'm in this place or situation and I'm likely not going to feel anxious or experience a panic attack. So, this is something that I, of course, struggled with for years and years. And for me, I wasn't housebound. I still went to work. I went to school. I was in college when I was struggling severely with agoraphobia. And it was incredibly hard for me to leave my house. It was incredibly hard for me to drive. I struggled with driving anxiety for years and years. And it was really that thought of, I don't want to experience panic and the fear outside of my home. I don't want to experience it in a classroom. I don't want to experience it while I'm driving. I would always convince myself, this is more dangerous experiencing anxiety or panic outside of your home. So, I'm sure there are a lot of people that can relate to, that's stuff that I struggle with. It's not just about, being afraid to walk outside of my home. It's much bigger than that. That's just a little bit about what agoraphobia can look like and what it is.
Do you think that there's like a solid trigger that triggers agoraphobia? Like anxiety is anxiety, but the fear of public speaking, I think, is like the number one thing that will cause someone to feel anxious. I'm sure after 9/11, getting on a plane was another anxiety. After COVID, you know what I mean? Like all of these traumatic events that happen for sure are going to trigger some anxiety. But for people that have struggled with agoraphobia, do you think there's something that happened that triggered that specific anxiety?
Yeah, it's typically panic. You experience panic, and then that is like the main thing that you always are going to circle back to. I don't want to experience that again. And I especially don't want to experience that in situations where I'm not comfortable, in places where I'm not comfortable. It really is trying to escape that. I don't want to feel anxious and I don't want to experience panic. And for many people, there are other contributors of agoraphobia. But for most people, it's, I don't want to experience the panic. And then they get into, some behaviors that can be really unhealthy, like avoidance and seeking reassurance that just reinforces the anxiety and sort of keeps you stuck. So you tend to think like, if I avoid that place, if I avoid that situation, that's going to help me, when sure, you probably feel some short-term relief not being in certain places or situations, but it's not the place or situation that's causing the anxiety or the panic. So by you avoiding it, it's really just doing yourself a disservice, because it's teaching your brain that scenario, that place, that thing is dangerous. You need to stay away from it. So then your brain gets that message, right? Of, okay, we can't drive in the car. We can't go to the grocery store. We can't go to the movie theater. We can't go on dates. We can't do all these things because that might happen.
I think for me, I got the part about making sure that it didn't cause, I didn't feed the anxiety meaning. I mean, I definitely did for years, don't get me wrong. But once I really started understanding this stuff, I pushed myself out of that comfort zone to do it, even though I knew I felt anxious prior to doing it because of the story. Let me take a step back. Actually, that was probably the biggest takeaway, was understanding that it was a story, understanding that it wasn't real, and that I didn't need to know where it came from or why is it this way. To be frank, understanding too that I was highly sensitive. When I got I'm a highly sensitive person, that my brain's super creative and that it can make up the craziest scenarios. Then I was like, oh, I'm not a freak. Like, this is actually a thing. And like, I got to label it. And, I got to learn coping skills and how to take care of myself that would help me to not have the anxiety get triggered, like caffeine, not having magnesium, like not getting enough sleep, not getting enough exercise, not getting enough vitamin D, not being out in nature, like things that wholeheartedly, to be frank, whether you're highly sensitive or not, you should probably be mindful of. But for someone who's a little bit more sensitive, needs to be a little bit more in tuned, right, with themselves to take care of themselves in that way. So that, in combination with understanding that it was just a story, and understanding that, okay, we're not going to not do something because that's not the right answer either, and pushing myself, I think all of those things combined kind of helped, but it still didn't stop it completely. Can you give some tips for someone like myself who, okay, I'm fully aware of all of this, but in the moment, if I get triggered, what do I do?
Yeah. So I want to go back, because you said a couple of things that I think people are really going to be able to resonate with, right?
Yep.
It's usually, you mentioned something about the anticipation. Sorry. So usually it's, you have so much anticipatory anxiety surrounding, I'm going to push myself to do this thing, or I'm going to do this thing, but it's already causing me to feel so much anxiety. And so it really is about, what are those stories that you're telling yourself? Because really what we tell ourselves is usually not a true depiction of our realities, or things that are likely to happen, or things that have even happened before. So it's really important. Like, a major thing that you're touching on is having awareness, like being aware of what the heck is even going on in your brain, because usually we're just so on autopilot that like we just let these thoughts and the stories come in, and then we respond to them in such an unhealthy way. And it's not that we're intentionally doing it, right? We're not like, actively trying to sabotage ourselves, but it's really hard to know, okay, how do I, work to overcome this? How do I change this? And one of the first steps really is being aware, because our brains are so complex, but they're just, they're so creative. They're going to do what any human brain does. It doesn't matter whether you struggle with an anxiety disorder or not. Your brain is going to go to creative places. It's always going to come up with the next thing. Like, oh, you're afraid of this. Let me take it one step further. You're afraid of that. Let me take it one step further. So it's like, next thing you know, you're like, okay, I'm really anxious about going to the store. And then you're like, well, what if I pass out when I'm in the store? What if the ambulance has to be called? Like you always jump to the next.
There's a person laughing that's like, I've had, that's anxiety. That's like, what if I literally just freak out? That was always my thought. Like, what if I'm in this interview and I just freak out? Like, what if I just ran out that door right now?
Oh yeah.
It's so crazy.
Yeah. And we've all had those thoughts. And I think, when you struggle with an anxiety disorder, you really hone in on those things
Mm,
and you start to think like what you were saying, like, I'm weird, I'm crazy, there's something
mm,
wrong with me. And it's like, okay, hold the phone. Like, let's back up and just acknowledge I'm human. My brain is doing what human brains do. They love to tell stories, they love to throw out all these creative ideas. And it's really about starting to develop that awareness of,
mm,
okay, this is happening.
mhm,
This story is being created because you can't stop the thoughts, right? I hear this all the
mhm.
time. It's like, well, Shannon, how did you start to begin to control your thoughts? And I'm like, no, 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 no. Like,
Yeah,
that
no.
is not what recovery is about. You can't stop your thoughts from coming in. You can't control them. The only thing that you can really do is respond to them in a healthy way. And that is, I'm acknowledging that the thought's there. I'm acknowledging that I'm feeling this sort of way. I don't want to feel it, right? I don't want to have these thoughts. But when you start to try to fight and push back against those things,
Mm,
that's when they get even louder. That's when they become even more, vicious and start to take over things and start to,
mhm,
decide whether or not how far you go or who you go with or who you do things with, all that sort of stuff. So
mm,
I really love to teach, like, step one, you've got to have an awareness. So you've got to say,
yeah,
okay, in this moment, I am feeling incredibly anxious. I feel my heart pounding, my
yeah,
hands feel sweaty, I feel shaky, my legs feel a bit, unsteady. I'm worried about, what if my legs give out? What if I can't walk out of this place? What if I pass out? Like, acknowledging that all that stuff's there and it's okay. Like, let it be there and try not to respond to it. This stuff takes practice, but not responding to it in such a judgmental way of being like, I need to stop thinking this. I can't believe I'm thinking this. Like, this is so ridiculous. What is wrong with me? It's like,
yep,
nope, let's just let all of it be and let's allow the thoughts and the feelings in. And then it allows you to start to acknowledge, your brain starts to then say, oh, okay, we feel this way and we
mhm,
can feel it and still move about the world. We can still do things. And yeah, it sucks. It doesn't feel comfortable,
no,
but we can feel the discomfort and still continue to move forward.
yep,
So I think, like, some of the major things that is really hard is doing this work because you're so used to, how do I not feel anxious? How can I get
right,
rid of it? How do I
right,
stop feeling this way? And the hardest part of recovery is the way that you stop it is by changing your relationship with it and
yeah,
allowing it in, allowing it
yep,
to just be there.
yep, yep. I think there were so many, I was like, I was like trying to like type as you're talking, and I'm like, I don't want anyone to hear the keyboard going. But you touched on some things that I want to highlight. I want to highlight that first off, 100% it's a practice. It is like, and it sucks because I wish it was as simple as like, let's take a pill, let's flip a switch. And it's just not. And I think when you're really doing this, there's a huge self-development piece that happens where you really learn how to take care of yourself in this way. It sounds corny, but it's like such a beautiful thing. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I can see your face. You're like, oh my God, this is like yummy. And I feel it on like a deep level, because when you know how to do this and you're like, shit, I just did that. Like, and I got through that, because you're not feeding it. The other thing that you said that I thought was so spot on, and I don't know how you said it, but basically what you were saying is detachment. Like, I have to learn how to detach from the story. That's like the biggest thing. And it's actually probably one of the things that I think most people will struggle with, because the addiction is, or not the addiction, but the unawareness, where you're just completely unaware of what's going on, is you go on autopilot. And autopilot is, I feed it and I'm scared of it. And I'm going to stay like this forever. And it's going to take me down a rabbit hole. Or yeah, I'm on the highway and I'm freaking out, like, and to not attach so much to that, that is the biggest practice. At least it was for me, learning how to not attach to every single story that was coming up and every single thought. Literally saved my life, changed my life 100%. Not judging the thought. That was
Yeah.
another big thing. Like, don't judge that you're anxious right now. It doesn't mean you're going to be anxious every day for the rest of your life. It doesn't mean that you're a freak. It doesn't mean that you're mentally ill. It doesn't mean that you're crazy. It means you're human and you're experiencing a human thing based on your makeup. So for
Yeah.
Stephanie, she's highly sensitive. If she's not super taking care of herself sometimes, then she might get a little anxious from time to time. So for me, this really helped at night. I don't know why. The at night anxiety of like waking up with anxiety or in the middle of the night would make me so anxious, because the immediate thought was, oh my God, I'm never going to go back to sleep again. Right? Like I'm never going to be able to fall asleep again. Every night I'm going to wake up with anxiety. Every night I'm going to feel like this. Or how am I going to get through the day? I'm going to be so tired because it's 3 a.m. and now I'm just like up with anxiety. Versus now, if I ever do experience even remnants of it, I'll immediately go to the place of like, okay, this is the day where Steph got up at 3 a.m. and she was feeling a little anxious, and I so don't judge it. And it actually feels so much better. It doesn't mean that the anxiety goes away, but there's just not a resistance to it.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's
Yeah.
super powerful, right? Because it is, you wake up, I've experienced this. Many people that I work with experience this. It almost is like that thing of it feels more dangerous. Like at nighttime,
Yeah.
it's so quiet, like the
Yeah.
world's dark. There's not anything really going on. And so it can be that, oh my gosh, like, what am I going to do? What am I supposed to do? What can I do? Like, how do I fix this? How do I make this go away?
Yeah.
And I have to get back to sleep. And,
Yeah.
all those stories and the things that you tell yourself. And it's like, okay, how about we just say, like, yeah, we woke up, we're feeling anxious, we're having a hard time. Get up, do something, walk around, like see how you feel, lay back down, like see if you can fall back asleep. It's something that you hit on, before we jumped into the nighttime anxiety part was really the meaning, like always looking for some sort of a meaning and wanting to attach a meaning to things. And just like you said, like, how about instead we just let ourselves be human? Because we're often looking for, why do I feel anxious? Why am I this way? Why can't I do whatever it is? And it's like, maybe instead of the why, because it really doesn't matter, like we're here now and you have to figure out how to move past this. Like, what is a healthy action that I can take? How can I respond to this in a healthy way so that I am not feeding it, that I'm not just welcoming it in and allowing it to become bigger and bigger? And I love what you just said. It's 100%. Like, you wake up in the middle of the night, you're driving, whatever it is, like none of this stuff makes anxiety more dangerous. Like, it's anxiety. Call it out for what it is. Let it be there. You can listen to the stories that you're telling yourself. You can create different narratives in your mind. Like, okay, I'm feeling anxious. This is how I'm feeling. This is uncomfortable. I'm worried about this. And now let me see what I can do. Like, maybe I just need a minute, and maybe I'll put on a meditation. Maybe I'll go for a walk. Maybe, I am not a huge fan of coping skills. And I think that this is a big thing that I teach that's different than what a lot of people teach. Is what I found throughout my recovery is I was given a lot of coping skills and tools and mechanisms. And oftentimes at the slightest feeling of anxiety, I would go to a coping mechanism. I'd go to a tool. I'd immediately start like breath work or, different mindfulness practices. And I wasn't giving myself the opportunity first to just slow down and acknowledge what was happening. I was just like using the coping mechanisms and the tools to make the anxiety go away. Like, okay, I wake up in the middle of the night, full blown panic, like, let me do this coping tool and hopefully it'll get rid of the anxiety. And it's like, that really did myself such a disservice, because that's sort of where my brain always wanted to go. And then I just felt more anxious by using that coping mechanism or tool. So it can be really hard, because oftentimes throughout the recovery journey, you just don't know, like, you don't even know sometimes the things that you're doing that are really reinforcing the anxiety versus just allowing you to work through it in a healthy way.
Do you believe, like, what are your thoughts on, so I am 100% highly sensitive, and I know that you don't have to be an empath to be highly sensitive, but most highly sensitive people, or most empaths are highly sensitive. I don't know how they word it, but basically it's like, you don't have to be one or the other, but sometimes, most likely, they're combined. But anyways, with the highly sensitive person, where their nervous system is just already super sensitive and they're prone to anxiety. I think a lot of people who have those nervous systems or sensitive nervous systems get triggered easily because of that. Do you think that that's something that you can ever reprogram or change? Or do you think that, I hear what you're saying with the coping skills for sure, because for me, that was 100% the thing, definitely at night, where I was like, okay, meditation, okay, this. And then it stunk when like none of that was working. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to get on the floor and do yoga at like 4 a.m, instead of just like, accepting, and it sounds crazy, and I know there's someone listening that's like, how can this possibly work? But just
Yeah.
accepting that it's here. And the more you can just sit in it, it actually just slowly moves through a little bit. It's just the
Yeah.
resistance to it that I think it hangs on to you, because it's like, okay, you're resisting me, which means you're feeding me, which means I'm just going to stay because this is right? The story's true,
Yeah.
versus just like seeing that it's there and letting it like slowly pass. I never understood that at all. And I think when I sat in it, and I know I just went all over the place, but when I sat in it, I didn't, I wanted it to go away. And so I struggled with the resistance piece. But going back to the highly sensitive thing, I love different people's takes on this that really, really talk about anxiety and focus on this, because I know my nervous system is super sensitive. So I'm like, for me, is this something where I'm always not going to always feel this way, but is this a part of who Stephanie is? I know it's probably a factor in terms of how much I have fed it and programmed myself to feel nervous about certain situations. But is this just part of my makeup, or what do you think?
Yeah. So I want to touch on both of the things that you talked about. So
Okay.
I'll first answer this question. So I, much like you, I think the story that you had mentioned a little while ago about always feeling anxious in school and like having the tummy aches and things like that. I think, yes, we all have, certain things that make us who we are. And some of us, like you're saying, you can be more empathetic, you can be a sensitive person, all of that stuff. But I think we also like tell ourselves these stories, right? Which I've heard time and time again of, I've just always been this way. I've just always been an anxious person. And for me, I can totally resonate with the story of my tummy was an absolute mess at the start of every school year. I would like beg and plead with my mom, please don't make me go to school. Like I would get sick, like I would
Yeah,
vomit, I would like
me
have
too.
these, it was awful. And
Yeah.
so, but I think, when you're an adult, you can form much more of a logical representation of maybe what was going on. That like school when you're a little kid is scary, right? It's like
Right.
big.
Right.
You're going through consistent change. You're around so many different people, like new experiences. You're having that separation from these people that have always been your caretakers, and likely you've had much smaller communities taking care of you when you were younger. All of this is a lot. So I think in general, you're going to have some kids who are much more sensitive to that stuff and other kids who are like, whatever, like
Yeah.
I'm totally go with the flow. And that's fine. That's part of being human. We all are designed differently. But I think it's when we really try to attach that meaning to like,
Mm.
I'm just an anxious person. This is just who I am. And
Mhm.
I did this for years. And I hear people say this stuff today, like even therapists. And I think it can kind of be a dangerous thing to label yourself as being an anxious person. Because
Mhm.
for me, I'm an emotional person, so I get emotional even talking about this stuff now. But I did this for years to myself.
Yeah.
I labeled myself as an anxious person. I labeled myself as somebody who could never move through the world differently and with
Mm.
more ease, and somebody that wasn't so affected by the slightest things. I'd always do that thing where these people, normal people can do these normal things and have no problems. And it's like, there's two part of that, like probably no, not true. Like you don't know what other people are going through, but like, it's also okay that I am moving through the world this way and experiencing it this way. And I don't need to attach such deep meaning to it. Like
Yeah.
people experience anxiety. Anxiety is an emotion. You're allowed to feel the emotion. Like don't beat yourself up for feeling it and experiencing it in the way that you do. I think it's just the dangerous part when you start to really like form that strong, I'm an anxious person.
Yeah.
I can't ever be any differently. And I can tell you my life looks a whole hell of a lot different than it used to. Like I don't move about the world like I used to. I travel, I go on airplanes all the time. I hike incredible mountains. I move freely throughout the world. But like something you said earlier that is really, really important is knowing this stuff about yourself and allowing yourself to acknowledge like my nervous system is sensitive. I know I know myself and I know some things that are going to pop up. It's
Yeah.
all in how you respond to that stuff, right? When it pops up, and also doing the work, like you said, like I need to spend more time in nature. I love me some vitamin D. I love moving my body. I love, doing all the self work stuff because I know if I do that, my nervous system is going to be much more regulated and I'm going to feel calmer and I'm going to feel like I'm able to approach harder things and not have it be so hard. So there's so much to it, right? But I really
Yeah.
would love for people to start getting away from the I'm an anxious person.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like, I really would love to break that down
Yeah.
in
No,
every
for
way
sure.
possible.
Do you think there's something that we could have received growing up that would have helped us to maybe not go down this road of of this struggle that we're trying to like break free from?
Yeah, 1,000%, right? I mean, like you said, your parents didn't really talk to you about it. Like anxiety wasn't something that people really talked about. It's
Right.
not even really something in today's world that gets talked about in school.
Right.
We really don't talk about how to manage emotions, what your emotions are, like how you can respond to them in a healthy way. Sort of as parents, I have a 3.5-year-old, almost 4-year-old, and it can be really challenging as a parent to approach these situations with a little child to say, okay, I want her to have a healthy relationship with her emotions. Let me pause because I need a second
Yeah.
to think of how to best teach her in this moment. And obviously, she learns most from me and how I approach things. And, one of the big things that is popping into my head right now is I work with a lot of moms that struggle with anxiety, and they'll often talk about, I don't want my kids to see it. I don't want them to take on my
Yeah.
struggle. I don't want
Yeah.
them to have to experience
I
this.
fully
And
tell my son,
yeah, and
like, mom's feeling a little anxious right now. That's okay. I know how to handle it. We're good. Like, you
yeah.
know what I
And I
mean?
love that because I
Yeah.
think as an adult, right, you can have that acknowledgement of if I try to hide my emotions from my kids, what is that teaching my kids? It's teaching your kids anxiety is too big, it's too scary. We don't talk about it. You're
Yeah.
not allowed to feel it. And so they get that messaging and they learn, yeah, suppress it. Don't let it be there, fight it. It's not something that you want to come up against because it's too big, it's too scary. And it's like, well, if you just put it out there, right? And we have more
Yeah.
discussions about it and kids can really acknowledge like, oh, like it's okay to feel this way. And
Yeah.
here's how I can respond to it in a healthy way. That stuff's huge. So yeah, I think there's definitely a lack of education. And just to like at the big part, right? In our culture, we're not very good with this, is just allowing ourselves to be human. Like
Right.
we're human, things are
Girl,
tough.
say it. That's true. I mean, it's true. For me, if I would have received more validation for how I was feeling, I think that would have been so incredibly huge. But instead, I was not judged, meaning like you're weird, you're crazy, you're a freak, all those things. I never heard that, but I didn't hear validation. And I think as a child, validation is literally the number one thing. I mean, even within your own self, like it's the number one thing that a child craves, that they need in order to grow up to be a healthy adult, because it gives them that reinforcement that what they're feeling is okay. And they need to see it mirrored from the adults around them because they don't know how to do that for themselves. So if someone would have said, hey, I think what you're experiencing is this. And, it's funny because like my mom knew, I think she didn't know to label it as anxiety, but she definitely knew like you're nervous, like you feel a lot, like, like she love her, you know what I mean? She did the best she can, but I
Yeah.
mean, that wasn't something back in the 80s. I'm aging myself, that was talked about, and I think mindful parenting now is, and look, it's still hard. Yes, we're mindful parents and we try to be, but it's still super hard, right? Like we're humans too, and we're juggling so much in a day and raising humans that it can be a challenge, right? But I think if I would have gotten that validation, it would have been such a huge thing for me to grow up to say it's normal versus making myself feel like this is not normal. I don't know why I feel like this, because it just wasn't something that was acknowledged or talked about.
Yeah. I think you're totally right. I mean, validation is huge with our emotions, how we're feeling, and also having that consistency, right? Of like, I am having my needs met in a healthy way from my parents, which a lot of children unfortunately lack that. And, I was
Yeah.
one of those kids. I had a parent that was very inconsistent and, wasn't able to manage his emotions in a healthy way. And that was really, really tough for me because what I learned was, yeah, I don't talk about this. I can't depend on you to help me to work through this. And so I often went inward. I got quiet. It's how I kept myself safe. And so
Mm.
some of those things, like, and I carried into my adulthood, and they were mechanisms that worked when I was a kid, but didn't work so much as an adult. So unfortunately, I had to work through all that stuff, which, the best thing we can do as parents, right, is educate ourselves, understand, and like talk freely about emotions and teach our kids how to have healthy responses to their emotions. So I want to go back to the second piece that you were talking about, which was like sitting with the anxiety, right? Because I
Mhm.
don't want anyone that's been listening to this to think, okay, this is the answer and this is going to be great. This is going to be easy. And
Right.
it's like the two pieces. It is going to suck and it is going to be really hard because
Mhm.
your brain has been taught how to respond to it in a healthy way for probably quite some time. And so when you're teaching your brain any new way of approaching anything, it's really tough. Your brain has a really tough time figuring out how to do it. And oftentimes when you're teaching it something new, it's going to scream back at you and say, no, 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 what are you doing? That other way that you used to respond was way better than this. Like this feels awful. And when you start to acknowledge your thoughts, you allow yourself to feel what you're feeling, you do all these healthy actions, your brain does start to scream and sound the alarms, and like you experience more anxiety and panic. And I remember when I started taking the healthy action, it felt worse. Like that it
Yeah.
felt like it was all hitting me tenfold. And I then went to the place where I'd convinced myself, see, I can't figure this out. I'm always going to be this way. Like, what is
Yep.
wrong with me? And this doesn't work. This is
Yep.
just another thing that doesn't work. And so it's something like we said in the very beginning, it takes practice. And so I don't want anyone thinking like, oh, I'm going to try this out and it's going to be great. And it's really, really tough stuff, but you've got to give yourself the opportunity to start to respond to it in a different way so that you can realize and understand what your brain is capable of, because it's capable of so much more than you give
Right.
it
Right.
credit for.
I think like one of the biggest things that I teach all my clients is a process called self-parenting. And I'm sure you probably have heard of it, to some degree. I mean, it's essentially the ability to have a conversation with yourself. We all have that inner child. You're always going to have that part of you. You're always going to have that part of you from the past, how you were raised, your upbringing, your programming, whatever you want to call it. So whether it's the inner child or the ego, whatever comes up first for you, I always tell people the inner child sounds sad, you know what I mean, and scared, and the ego is just straight up a bully. I'm like, so it's very easy to tell who's talking. So
Yes.
when those two voices come up, and those two voices live in the back of the mind. So if that's 90% of your day or 80% of your day, that conversation is coming from that part of your brain, of your mind, then the way you consciously respond, right? What do they say? We only use 10% of our conscious mind. So if the way you respond is coming from the conscious mind, that's your actual real self, your logical self, your healthy self, whatever, soul, intuition, whatever word works best for you. And so I kind of teach that. I teach my clients the ability to do this, to recognize the story in the back that's coming up and to not attach to it and to validate it and to soothe it. I think emotional health is something that is it's crazy to me that it's something that we don't know how to do for ourselves. We can motivate ourselves, we can push it under the rug, because that's a lot of people, that was the family environment that we grew up in, no acknowledgement and just pushing things under the rug or judging them and things like that. Those are the patterns that we learn. But to do the opposite of validation, detachment, soothing, those three things, I mean, that's emotional health, right? Which is for me under that bucket of mental health. So there has to be, how do I emotionally take care of myself? How do I logically take care of myself? And understanding the difference between the two, right? And for me, that process of being in environments, whether I was on a first date after my divorce and I'm getting anxious because I'm across the table from this guy and what is he thinking? You know what I mean? Or I had social anxiety for years where I didn't enjoy being in crowds of people talking,
Mhm.
or even just talking one-on-one with even a friend. I felt the need to talk really fast and like to get it out there, or to drive on the highway and go somewhere out of my comfort zone. Like all these different situations that when I started like really learning, like, okay, how do I have this conversation with myself? How do I be, if I'm that little child that's still feeling all of those things, how do I be the parent? Like, what did I need to hear growing up? And really this clicked for me when I had my son. And I was like, if this thought was coming from him and he's in the back seat and he looks at me and he's like, oh my God, mom, we're on the highway right now. Like, what if I just freak out and and he's going a mile a minute. Like, what would I do? I would never look at him and be like, oh my God, yes, we're going to go off the highway and this is going to be so incredibly bad. And you would never do that for anyone, let alone your child, but even a total stranger, you wouldn't be able to do that because you're detached from the story. He's
Yeah.
emotionally having it in his head, but you're on the outside. And so when I kind of got that process, I'm like, shit, this is a game changer because it allowed me to have more control over myself versus just letting myself just go down these rabbit holes so quickly.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I love that. So I'm a huge proponent of like your self-talk. And once you start to become aware of how you talk to yourself, then you can actually do the work of changing it
Yeah.
to start to talk to yourself in a more healthy and kind way. And it's exactly what you're saying. Like we've all
Yeah.
heard that how would you talk to a loved one who's experiencing what you're experiencing? And
Right.
yes, you're not going to beat them up. You're not going to not validate their feelings or their experience. You're going to
Right.
do all the opposite of that. And that's exactly what you need. Like, I look at my daughter all the time and she's running up against a lot of tough things as a little girl, trying to navigate and figure out and learn all these different things. And she can so easily get frustrated. And, I'm so kind to her. It's like, I think in a day, I give her like, a
Oh my
hundred kind
God.
messages. Yeah,
100%.
at least, and like motivation and all of that. And I'm like completely backing her. And then I'm like, okay, this is a good reminder, Shannon. Like, when's the last time you gave yourself a kind message? When's the last time you talked to yourself this way? And like, not just doing it in those moments where you find yourself beating yourself up, but just like in general, like, hey, like acknowledging I am making amazing progress. I'm doing amazing things. I wasn't able to do that 2 weeks ago. I'm doing it
Yeah.
now. Like, how amazing of me, like all that stuff. Like, we need that just as much as a little kid needs that.
Well, yeah. And I think you touched on a good point of if you do it throughout the day, if you do like the little bits, don't just come in and try to handle the big stuff.
Mhm.
Because my whole belief is I have to learn how to build trust with myself. And for so many years, because I was unaware, I didn't know, I abandoned myself. I made
Mhm.
myself feel worse. I fed those stories and I went down rabbit holes. And so it took me, the practice of doing this was really the practice of building trust within myself, that when I say to myself, hey, look, we're okay, that part of me, that inner child was like, okay, all right, I believe you. And that's where for me it started going away quicker, or it wasn't staying with me, or wasn't taking me down rabbit holes, because I had been doing the work, not just in those catastrophic moments, but in the little moments of like, hey, you did a great job. Hey, like, I'm so incredibly proud of you. I'm a big advocate of affirmations. I tell people all the time, listen to them all the time, as much as you possibly can, because you need to get that in to the back of the mind. And right now, what's there is just super unhealthy. And so the
Yeah.
only way you can really get rid of that old way is to become that new version, right? And that just takes time.
Yeah, it takes time and so much practice, and it's hard, and you have to be gentle with yourself. And that is the type of work, though, that has you starting to trust and rely on and believe yourself more, believe in yourself. And that's one of the hardest pieces in life, right?
Yeah.
Is trusting that you are capable, trusting that you can work through things on your own, trusting that you can do whatever it is, and being able to say, like, I believe in myself, like, I can
Yeah.
do this. And, until you start to do that self work, like, you're not going to believe it. You're not,
Yeah. No.
I love affirmations, I love mantras, all that stuff. And a lot of times, when I started to do the work, I didn't believe in half the shit I was telling myself,
Right.
but,
Right.
I came
True.
to believe it. And it wasn't like the affirmations or the mantras did the work, but they
Right.
helped to support me in doing the
Right.
hard work.
Right. I love this. Thank you so much for coming on. I think it was such a, I mean, it definitely helps people because I think if anything, if you can at least get validation, I think that that's huge. I wish I would have at least gotten that validation to start. And that's where it starts, right? Is being like, okay, this is normal and I'm going to be fine. And I'm going to learn how to take care of myself in order to, deal with these things. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it, Shannon.
Yeah, you're so welcome. This has been so enjoyable. I've had so
So where
much
can
fun.
people find you? That's what we want.
Yeah, I am primarily on Instagram. So
Okay.
at a healthy push. You can also find me on my website, ahealthypush.com. Very, very active on Instagram, reels. You can DM me, whatever you'd like. I offer courses, the whole thing, but I love Instagram. So you can find me there.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, thanks guys. Listen, we will see you next week and take care.